Okay, we already previewed kind of the game of the week in Arkansas, Texas A&M. You can check that out, but this is dropping on a Friday, and it's the true game of the week. Mizzou, Boston College, the one you are all watching. Jake Leifeld with me. Let's get into it. Mizzou 2-1 so far this year. The loss to Kentucky. What are your general thoughts in the young season?
The offense looks pretty good, but
Yeah,
the run defense is just terrible. The defense overall isn't very good at all.
right, right.
No.
My key is, so we were just discussing the stat line for Dennis Garcelle, our backup quarterback, because Dracovic gets injured. Just so it's the
Yeah.
worst when you have an injury, early in the year for your college football team. But he threw only 13 passes for 34 yards. It was basically a yard per attempt. And we
Yeah.
dominated. Like we dominated. How do you do that in a 28-3 win? So that's my only thing is he had to have been keeping off of tape plays for Garcelle for Mizzou. Because I mean
Yeah.
that game was over. Temple, like, why do anything to possibly help you game plan?
That's got to be it. And your run game's pretty good, right? I mean,
Right.
obviously it is if you were able to run on them that much. I mean, Temple's not very good, but still.
Right. And that's kind of what we're going to have to do because, yeah, I've got the stat for you here. It's not great. Only teams worse at rush defense in terms of yards per game than Mizzou, Western Kentucky, Rice, Charlotte, and Northern Illinois.
Yeah,
So
that seems about right. Yeah, I was excited about Steve Wilkes coming in, but I don't know what the deal is, but I don't know if it's scheme or what, but I'm not impressed so far with him.
But I am impressed with your rush offense on the other side of things too, because I think, first of all, I don't get the Vegas line. I think BC is simply a better team, but I guess it is pretty tight. I guess we'll find out on Saturday. But the key for you guys, I think, is going to be, I'm worried because based on that stat line for Dennis Garcelle, how are we going to be able to go blow for blow if you're able to figure out our defense? Because you got a decent quarterback. If you can get the run game going, the pass game's going to follow suit. That's how you win that game.
Yeah, Tyler Beatty's been really good. Basilek's pretty good. He struggles with the deep ball a little bit, but he's a good solid quarterback. But if we can figure out how to stop the run, I really like our chances. Your quarterback stat line from last week, yeah, hopefully they were just hiding scheme or something. But
Right.
if he plays that bad again, or if that's what they plan on doing, I really like Mizzou's chances.
That wouldn't get it done against Bishop Sycamore.
Yeah.
What do you make of your coach, Drinkwitz? What is he doing where he comes out and he says, I don't really want to go do this game. What are we doing here? I want to play a regional game.
I don't know what the deal with that was. I mean, Halfley said, like, I don't think he meant anything by it. I saw that, but I think I would take a little bit of offense to that. I mean, it was
like you're
kind
giving
of a
us a
weird
chip.
thing to just say. I don't know.
It's like
I like him.
Yeah.
I like him. I think he's good at recruiting. Like, I think he's got that going for him, but I'm not like totally bought in on him at all yet.
Well, after Barry Odom, I mean, you guys have to miss Gary Pinkel, right? Because Odom was one game over 500, and then you get Drinkwitz. Okay, let's go, and then you literally go 500 last year.
Yeah, Barry Odom was just absolutely terrible. The Wyoming game, we always joke about this. He was like, the altitude only affects you if you think about it or let it. It's like, no, it's pretty scientific.
Just tough it out.
Yeah.
That's great. No, I couldn't believe with Drinkwitz. And yeah, so he's the former App State coach. So, I mean, he came in, he was a sought after coach. But then he comes back and covers his ass with, no, I'm excited. My family's out there touring Boston. Okay, cool. Halfley's like, so you kind of are lukewarm. You're asking your coach to prove it. I love Halfley because he comes back and he says, no, hey, we're good. But his response was so great. He's basically saying, shit, we'll go play anywhere, which was so badass. He's like, we'll have fun doing it and get better every game.
Yeah, Halfley's great. I like him.
Yeah. I'm worried because the USC job comes open and now you're hearing all the, like, I don't want them flirting with my guy.
I was going to text you and joke about that, but I wasn't sure.
Dude,
Sorry.
Cowherd literally came out. He's been doing this like Instagram villain stuff where he's just giving like vague responses about how he hears from sources that the incoming, hot list for their coaches, the wife loves the good weather in California. And I'm literally like looking up Hafley's wife, where she's from and shit. I'm so
yeah, I don't blame you.
scared.
I could see him. Seems like it would be a good fit.
Right.
But
Ryder Cup starts tomorrow. How jacked are you?
I'm extremely pumped. I'm working from home today. I've been watching the practice rounds and stuff. Yep. It's gonna be sweet. The crowd's already going nuts.
What could you tell me about Whistling Straits as it's back on home soil?
I've never played there. I know a couple people that have. I know it's difficult. It's a lot. It's designed after a lot of the European courses, on the water, a lot of wind. It's cooler up there. It was like 48 this morning while they were playing. So that's like advantage Europeans.
Yeah.
The Americans, it's minus 215 for the Americans to win. I think that's way too heavy of a favorite. I think we're better, but I think it's going to be close. I mean,
I was shocked to see this. Europe's won 4 of the last 5, 7 of the last 9.
9 of the last 12. They've dominated the past like 25 years.
That's crazy. Yeah, so that starts tomorrow. You're a pretty damn good golfer yourself. What's your record so far? What's the low score on the summer?
79 this summer. But I followed that up with like 2 weeks later, I went and played with Gray at his country club, and I shot 100.
Yeah,
so
that's the game of golf.
Yeah.
I got to 90. I'm trying to shave that.
There you go.
Hopefully. Let's talk some STL Cardinals. Holy shit. I mean, they're losing right now, but don't ever count them out on this streak. We got to go to this wild. Well, it's going to be in LA. So that's what's crazy is, hey, this is awesome. Is it going to be the Dodgers? I think the Giants, who I can't believe what the Giants are doing this year, which has been incredible.
Yeah, they're good.
Cardinals likely securing the wild card spot, and it's been a hell of a September.
Yeah, I have their win total above 86.5. Wow. So this win streak has made that seem like looks like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have a future on them for the World Series too. But yeah, they're losing right now. Waino just threw a cutter that was an absolute meatball. But yeah, I think having it be a 1-game series, the wild card against I think it'll be the Dodgers. I think that helps us because I don't see us beating them in a 5 or 7-game series. They're just too good.
And honestly, it's like over the last decade, we've kind of had the Dodgers number in the playoffs as opposed to the Giants having ours. I can't believe this Giants team. Darren Ruff, Brandon Belt, Crawford, Posey takes a year off, comes back. He's basically an all-star. I think he was. Evan Longoria. I mean, that's crazy. But the Cardinals, what's awesome too, is like, it's kind of like the Nationals a couple of years ago when they won it as a wild card team. Like, as you said, if we show up and somehow 1 game beat the Dodgers just because it's 1 game, anything can happen, then what our confidence level's got to be through the roof.
I think at that point, if we get to that point and get to the playoffs, I think we would be one of the teams to beat. Yes, for sure.
We'd have to go to a playoff game. We'll make it happen.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Lastly, we'll get you out of here, Jake Leifeld. What do you make of Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC eventually?
I like it.
Yeah.
I think like everyone's saying, we're gonna go to the 4 super conferences or whatever.
Yeah.
I think those are 2 good teams to bring in. I hate Texas, obviously, but I think they'll struggle when they come over, but I think they could have some good seasons, kind of similar to Mizzou.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to find out just how tough the SEC is. Just look what happened against Arkansas. And yeah, it's good. As soon as the SEC network became a thing, this was inevitable. It became a super conference. Everyone saw the money and they're going to it. That's good stuff. Jake Leifeld, appreciate the time. And let's see what happens on Saturday, brother.
All right, man. I'll be texting you.
All right, welcome in. You just heard an extensive recap, deep dive, or excuse me, not a recap, a deep dive into Boston College, Mizzou. We're going to be posting this on a Friday. Something that I'm excited to get into is fantasy football. Obviously, I've been into it, but talking more about it, bringing it to our podcast network. Ricky Larson, he's the host of Lucky Shots One Word Media, Lucky Shots One Word Space Media. Great job what you do, Ricky. Me and you in a past life, South Dakota baseball. We were in the weeds there doing some South Dakota baseball. But you have great graphics work, great fantasy football, and your own podcast now. So a little bit about yourself and what our partnership is going to be going forward.
Yeah. So just every week we dive into what's going on fantasy football wise. We cover, injuries, roster moves, things like that. Kind of talk about matchups every week, because that's a big part of fantasy football is who's playing who and how does that defense stack up against, say, your wide receivers, things like that. So just try to get into that, give everybody the best knowledge I have of, this is what I think is going to happen this week. This is why, things kind of like that. Just kind of getting started up and things will probably change on what we cover, how we cover it. But right now it's just a lot of, hey, this guy's hot, this guy's not, this matchup looks good. Pull the trigger on this guy, things kind of like that.
Lucky Shots Media is the place. They do great work, a weekly show every week, great graphics, great fantasy advice. We get a bonus here from Ricky Larson. We're talking UFC 266.
Yeah.
2 title fights, and then of course we're trudging out Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler too, like as they're both wheeling each other out. One of them is on a walker. Let's start there. How about the quote today, or the interview that he did with one of the ESPN guys? Nick Diaz saying he should fight Kamaru Usman instead of Robbie Lawler. That fight would not even last. Like, Usman would kill him before he parked his car in the 100%. Parking lot. What are you expecting from a 5-round match? Robbie Lawler versus Nick Diaz 2, and both these guys is basically into their 30s.
Right. I mean, the last time we saw Nick fight was in 2015.
Yeah.
Quite a while ago. I mean, up until that point, 2 of his last 3 fights were for a championship. Fought Carlos Condit for the interim title, lost that, fought GSP, and GSP, let's be honest, is one of the greatest to ever grace that sport. He only has 1 win inside the UFC, and that was against BJ Penn. So that's a good name, but you haven't fought for 6 years, period. Right. And then you're coming into the UFC, you're fighting a guy who honestly was at the top of that division for, a year or 2, who in his own right hasn't fought in a while, but yeah, it'll be fun to watch. The Diaz brothers are always a good time.
Well, so when most recently Nate Diaz fought, and it was crazy. I remember watching this fight. Yeah, he was applaud. It was almost like he won the fight just for like having a chin. Everyone, right. Even though Leon Edwards destroyed him, everyone walked away was like, "Damn, Diaz looked great." It was like, what the hell? I got some great stats for you. Nick Diaz hasn't won a fight in almost 10 years. Robbie Lawler is 1-5 in his last 6 fights. His only win against Cowboy Cerrone,
which he's also on his walker as well. So
exactly, yeah. It was at the nursing home. It was held at the nursing home. So it's a great fight to add on to a card. You know what I'm saying? As a 5-rounder,
2 title fights, and
And you and me both are guys that are going to be buying the pay-per-view no matter what. They always do a great job. So that's the first fight. Then we get Shevchenko. I mean, this is dominant. It's not even worth betting. She's so much of a favorite. 7 straight wins for her, 6 straight in title fights. But I love looking at one of my favorite things about UFC. And I want to reiterate this. Like, I didn't get into it until the pandemic forced me on the UFC, and then I was obsessed with it, much like you probably were the first time you laid eyes upon it.
Yeah, I was a kid when I first saw the UFC, and ever since.
Yeah, you're a veteran. No, I know. Lauren Murphy, I've watched her in a couple of fights, and I love. So here's my thing: is like I love looking how they enter the ring. I don't know. That doesn't work for every fight, but I like just kind of seeing what, in the Ben Askren fight against Jake Paul, you could tell in the weigh-in, holy shit, that dude looks like he could get beat up by a hobo. Like he doesn't take this seriously. Lauren Murphy looks jacked. Now, Shevchenko's no one to fucking discount, but I always get worried about this stuff with her and the Lioness. Always so big favorites, dominant in their sport. Can they be toppled?
I mean, it's kind of hard. You look at Shevchenko, and her last loss was 2017 to Nunes, who she's lost to twice. She only has 3 losses, and both those losses have been real close decisions. So obviously she's incredible. She's finished 4 of her last 7, but you look at Murphy, she's not a slouch, I mean, 7-4 in the UFC. She's on a 5-fight win streak. My only problem there, besides going up against somebody as dominant as Shevchenko, is if this does go to round 4, round 5, Murphy's never been there. She's only been in 3-round fights in the UFC at least. And I mean, I don't want to, be that guy, but I don't think she's going to make it out of the first 2 rounds.
And that's the trouble with these kind of fights is like Dana White and company, they're just looking for someone to sell the fight because Nunes and her are so dominant that it's like, who can actually these girls they don't even get to fight in these 5-round matchups.
Yeah. I mean, you saw it when Ronda Rousey first came in, and everybody's like, no one's going to beat her. So eventually there's going to be somebody.
Yes.
But I have no idea. I think those two, even though it's
still a long while away. I mean, from what we've seen.
Yeah. And even though it's, 2-0 in the Nunes corner, I think these two just need to fight again because they're the only 2 people really that are competitive for each other.
Right.
It seems like everybody else is just,
it's like they're saving that.
Yeah.
I feel like they're saving John Bones Jones too for one of these fights. Like they just got him waiting the limbs.
Right.
Okay. Last UFC question, then we'll get to fantasy football, the title fight. So Volkanovski, so again, I'm like, a newbie. I have finally started watching it the last 2 years. I saw the second fight versus him versus Holloway. And I know the first one, it's debatable. People thought Holloway should have won. Second one, I thought Holloway should have won.
Yeah, it was both of them were real close, real good to watch. I like Volkanovski. I'm kind of biased towards him, so obviously I thought he won that last fight.
Well, to your point, I will say, after kind of reviewing it after the shock of initially seeing it, I was like, holy shit, yeah, he does a great job of just extending and almost not giving away the first couple of fights, but saving his energy to explode in the last 3 and kind of shocking your mind. Like, wait a second, where did this come from? Did he steal this fight?
Yeah, it's crazy. He's like a master of control in there.
Right.
He may not go out there and, like some guys go out there and blow themselves up in the first couple of rounds.
Sure.
He's very smart. And I mean, that's obviously why he's only lost once in his life. But I mean, he's just, it's very sneaky. And that's why in some fights you're like, did he really win? But you go back and you watch the whole fight. He just controls everything and nothing really ever gets out of his control.
So I haven't really seen Ortega fight. So 2018 was, I know. I know he's in he fought. What is it? The Contender Series, or they're both a fighter series that they were doing against each other?
It was quite a while ago, but his last loss was to Holloway, who Volkanovski's had 2 real tough fights against, and that was his only loss, I believe.
Correct.
And it was a doctor stoppage.
Yeah, so that's what's crazy is he lost to Holloway, who, again, it's kind of two really great fights between Volkanovski and Holloway. So Ortega loses to Holloway at the end of 18, as you said, doctor stoppage at the end of round 4. So he made it to round 4. So again, just looking at the pre-fight promos, which they do a great job with these promos, I eat them up. Volkanovski looked old, and Ortega kind of looks like, Holy crap. I'm about to re-announce myself. Now, again, his most recent fight, it was a fight night, and I didn't see. This was when I was a UFC fan, but it was one of those fight nights that like you could skip over and not realize. But Ortega dominated the Korean Zombie, and he looks like a guy that could certainly give the champ a run for his money.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you've watched any of his fights, even in the Holloway fight, I mean, Holloway was on a different level as it was. Probably would have won that fight if it went to decision anyway. But Ortega is another controlled guy. You know, he gets you wrapped up and it's over. You know, and I mean Volkanovski, you know, he's a scrapper as well. But if you look at Ortega, he's got 3 submissions, 3 knockouts in the UFC. He's a guy that goes out there, controls you, and finishes you. You know, so it'll be interesting to watch. Ortega is another guy I like, so I'm gonna have a hard time, you know, choosing between who, you know, I want to win that fight.
Former high school Wyoming wrestler Ricky Larson with us. Great graphics guy too, and excellent fantasy football knowledge. Check him out. Lucky Shots Media. We're going to do a partnership for the football. I'll be giving some betting picks. You can check that out tomorrow on Friday on their YouTube page, and you can check this out tomorrow on our respective page for the fantasy football advice on Corbet's Corner. So let's get to it. I'm going to give you my NFL DraftKings lineup. You'll kind of comment on it, and then I want to get your thoughts on your top quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, plus your value plays at each of those. Okay, so here's my lineup. I love me some Mahomes, no matter what. Mahomes.
But worth it.
Right. Little expensive. I would do that. Edwards-Helaire, just because he's 4,800 this week, coming off of, and he burned me. Don't get me wrong, Ricky. I mean, he burned me, but talk about him a little bit. He hasn't really lived up to his potential, albeit only a sophomore, 1 game into a sophomore campaign.
Yeah. I mean, the view of him in fantasy football is a little skewed. For some reason last year, he was one of the top running backs taken.
Yeah.
There was just a bunch of hype. I mean,
he was a first rounder, right?
He wasn't given a fair shake really because expectations were so high, and it wasn't like he went out and was absolutely awful last year. Yeah. He was middle of the pack, kind of where you should expect somebody like him. The only problem with him in my eyes is he was brought in as a receiving back because that's what he did in college. And you don't really see a whole lot of that. And when he goes out and puts the ball on the ground to cost your team a game, and even in fantasy, you know, if you're in a close game and your running back fumbles, that
costs a lot of people some.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, he's not terrible. He's just a guy you would have to temper your expectations.
Sure.
To be something a little smaller than what you would expect.
Yeah, I'm mainly playing the number there. I mean, 4,800 for a guy that could potentially bounce back. I don't know. What do you think about Bengals players this year? I'm playing Mixon and Higgins in my current lineup. Jamar Chase has been solid. I know Higgins is questionable, but Mixon is turning into he's almost knocking on the door of Cook class at that RB1.
So before the season, was not into Joe Mixon.
Neither was I. Yeah.
Last year, you know, he's always had kind of injury troubles. He's been hyped up to be something that I thought he was not. And at least for these first 2 weeks of the season, he's lived up to what his hype is supposed to be. You know, he's right now by far looking like the best player on that offense. And he's going out and performing. He's getting involved in the passing game a little bit. He's running the ball hard. You know, he's turning himself into one of those top running backs that you want in your lineup every week.
Right. And that game is interesting too, because I was on the Bengals when they beat the Vikings. Great. Then I was hesitant because this game was interesting. I thought the Bears at home would win, you know, like just one of those football games, and Burrow looked bad. But coming off of that, I think that ever since the Steelers were 9-0 last year and Big Ben like clearly showed that he could not quite throw the same, it's been an odd team to kind of handicap, see what's going on. A lot of people like the Bengals division matchup here. And if it is a random, I mean, look what the Texans are doing right now. Last time we checked, I mean, it's a close game. If this is another bounce back for Burrow and a good offense and a decent defense against a lackluster Roethlisberger, it's going to be an interesting divisional game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I probably like the most out of this game is the defense, just because
low scoring.
Pittsburgh's offense hasn't, showed a whole lot. But if I was to really go with any offensive piece besides Mixon, I would say T. Higgins. I'm a guy who in fantasy, if I'm going to bet on somebody, I want to bet on somebody with volume, and he's kind of the target hog there. He's going to get a lot of touches, which touches equals opportunity, which leads to points at some point. He doesn't have that big play. I don't want to say ability, but that big play opportunity, because those are going to Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
But he's still got a chance to get in the end zone. He's got a chance to get you 6 to 8 catches. So I think he'd be probably the best value from the Bengals.
And if it's a shootout, they're going to be looking for receivers, right?
Yeah.
I drafted Boyd kind of as a flyer too, and he lackluster in week 1, looked decent in week 2. I still think as an offense that Burrow's going to be heavily passing in. There's a lot of Bengals options there. Okay, so I took Marvin Jones Jr. last week, was decent against the Jaguars. Jaguars overall disappointing, but they've had some stars fantasy-wise. Cooper Kupp obviously was the talk of last week. I'm picking both of them for my lineup this week at receiver.
I like that. I mean, who do we – oh, goodness, I'm going to have to get into who they're playing. So you got Cooper Kupp against Tampa Bay. That's
tough. That's tough.
That's a bit of a tough matchup, but with the way that the Rams are, they've got Robert Woods as well. They have Tyler Higbee.
I got to stop you there. I also got Woods as my flex. So I'm kind of banking on maybe the Rams shock the Buccaneers. It might be depending on how you, the individual, views that game going.
But I mean, if you look at the way the Cowboys game went with Tampa Bay, I would put the Rams offense in that same kind of category as Dallas, where they've got all those weapons, and you saw CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper both have great games. So I don't think that I think where Tampa Bay's defense's strength is running. Yeah. So outside of that, I think there's value in both Kupp and Woods. And if you can get them both on your team and keep yourself in that salary cap, then that's a great play right there.
Last thing I had for my lineup, we don't have to discuss it much. I got Hawkinson. I mean, tight end's always a position you could play the favorites. Cards defense, I'm hoping for a bounce back. I know the Vikings don't look good on paper overall, but the offense, you can't deny. Kirk Cousins looks solid, so we'll see what they do against Seattle.
Well, and the whole Vikings offense, it kind of looks weird right now.
Yeah.
They don't have a tight end, and you have KJ Osborne, who's pretty much stepped in and been, he's not a tight end, but he's been that target guy, eating up what Irv Smith would be having, which, not a lot of people saw. And he's a value, I would think, at a flex position in a game against Seattle, where Seattle's defense necessarily isn't great either.
Great point. Speaking of value, let's get your plays value. Quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, the flex position. Ricky Larson, host of Lucky Shots Media. Give him a follow on YouTube, Twitter, etc. Great stuff. Every week they do a great breakdown show, and we're going to be collaborating throughout the season on our podcast, his podcast. So let's wrap up some value plays you have for us here on Corbet's Corner.
So, I mean, for quarterback, I'd say they haven't looked great this year. This offense hasn't. But Matt Ryan against the Giants.
Yes, I love it.
He's only 5,400. So that's a real good value against a defense. We just saw Taylor Heineke, a backup quarterback, go out and throw 50 times, and they won the game. And he had quite a good game. The Giants defense isn't necessarily great. And I think this as a whole is a great bounce back game for the Falcons. And I think it's one that's going to be kind of a shootout, to be honest. So that's who I would say the value for quarterback would be right there. Honestly, at running back, he's 5,700. So he's not going to break the bank, but he's on a high value side. Chase Edmonds against Jacksonville.
Solid.
He's obviously the number one guy, and he's getting more involved in the passing game. And if you're in a PPR, and I believe DraftKings does run PPR.
I'm not too correct.
Yep. Okay. He's a guy that's going to get quite a bit this week. And if Jacksonville does any sort of keeping up with Arizona, he's going to continue to be in the passing game. And if not, he'll get a lot of running work.
To your point, I think he went 14 points, 15 points, and basically just solid, efficient work.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to blow up, but
just a solid play.
Yeah. If 15 points, that's solid from a running back every week. Let's see. I'd say wide receiver is a little tough.
Always is.
This is where I would probably spend up a little bit for your wide receivers. Some guy that is kind of in the middle, going back to a matchup we just talked about, but Sterling Shepard against the Atlanta defense.
Yes.
He's only 5,900. So kind of middle of the bank there, but he's a guy who these past 2 weeks, he has been the guy for the Giants offense. A lot of targets. What more can you ask for from a wide receiver?
Dependent a couple years with Jones now. And as you said, we both expect this to be a shootout. I also like where your head's at because I'm hoping Atlanta's going to win, as we talked about earlier. But we'll see. We'll find. There's going to be one of those franchises going to find a way to just lose embarrassingly.
For sure.
Hopefully a good fantasy game, though.
And then one more wide receiver just above him, about 6,000. But he had a huge week last week, and he's going against the Jets defense, Courtland Sutton.
Yeah,
I think he's really starting to solidify his spot in that Denver offense. Jerry Jeudy going down, being out for a bit. We saw a lot of volume go to Courtland Sutton, and against a Jets defense that isn't great, and a Jets offense that gives the ball away quite a bit. The offense is going to have quite a few chances to go out there and make something happen. So I think Courtland Sutton as well would be a great value.
What was interesting with Sutton was week one was kind of an anomaly, right? He's always going to get targets, and week one, a dominant win. He just didn't get fantasy numbers, but he bounced back in a big way in week two.
Well, yeah. And I think that had a lot to do with, he needed to trust himself coming off of that knee injury. Yeah. He got a little bit in preseason, full game speed against a real opponent. I think he just kind of had to work his way back in. And last week, if you had questions is he back, I think he answered them last week. And then if I was to go with a tight end, all right, hear me out. I bet on him last week too, and one called back touchdown kind of screwed that over. But Jared Cook, the Kansas City defense, they're not terrible, but we saw last week, and
susceptible and week one.
Yeah, they do give up passing yards, and Cook is a guy who gets quite a few targets. Herbert likes throwing to him, and last week had that touchdown to Jared Cook not got called back. One, I would have been a little closer in my fantasy matchup, but two, he would have actually been a top 10 tight end last week.
Right.
And, for only, 3,900, he's somebody that if you want to spend up on wide receivers, if you want to spend up on a quarterback, he's going to be there, not breaking your bank, as opposed to if you went Travis Kelce, who's at 8,000,
Tight end is such a lucrative position because there's always those guys at the top. I thought you were going to say Higbee. I was on Higbee huge the second week, and he was just a ghost town. He did not show up.
Yeah, he's a guy I was kind of high on going into the season.
Yeah, same. Yeah,
seeing Matt Stafford in LA.
He's just got so many weapons.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with some of those offenses is who do you bet on, because there's so many places for the ball to go. you don't know who's going to be that guy.
Sure. He's Ricky Larson. You're going to be hearing a lot from him over the course of the season on the Corbett Sports Entertainment Podcast Network. I encourage you to check out his podcast, Lucky Shots, one word, space media. They do about a 2-hour show every single week. It's fantastic. Great graphics. They dissect the entire headlines and then break down the fantasy impacts. Ricky, we've been working together, in our professional careers earlier in the decade. Great to get this partnership going, and appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and enjoyed having you on a few days ago. That'll come out tomorrow. So excited to just see where this goes and have a lot of fun doing it.
Yes, sir. The NFL season in full effect. Check out my picks on his podcast tomorrow on his YouTube channel, Lucky Shots, one word, space media. Ricky, appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thank you.